Welcome, book lovers. We are back. Marisa Serafini here and Phil Svitek once again. We are going to be talking about They Both Die at the End, a book by Adam Silvera. I first heard about this book, thankfully, through Instagram and TikTok, and it's now what you call book talk. So, I mean, I personally don't have TikTok, so like, you know how social media, everything just eventually comes to Instagram. And it came across my feed multiple times over and over again. I was like, all right, fine, I'll read this book. I really enjoyed it. And we'll definitely get into it. So if you haven't read this book, pause us, go read the book, and because it's going to be spoiler filled. And Phil, what were your quick thoughts about this book?
Yeah, so I mean, when you talk about spoilers, there's not much to ultimately spoil as far as, they both die at the end.
Yeah.
It's very much kind of like that Romeo and Juliet-esque thing where right at the top, you're told what's going to be the ending. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have that dramatic irony. And really, it's more about, okay, well, what happens and how do we get here? And what does that mean thematically and so forth, right? And so, in that sort of same way, I felt it worked overall really well. There was maybe like two-thirds into it where it was starting to drag a little bit, and then we got a few more characters involved. Where I was like, okay, now we're kind of because it's like in a sadistic way, you're kind of waiting for them to die, like sort of a thing. Like, okay, this is all cute, but what are we progressing here? But overall, minor nitpicks aside, I thought it worked well, and it is a very tragic story, and I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually personally have never heard of Adam Silvera. He's written a lot of fantasy books as well, but he's becoming bigger in the LGBTQIA plus community for his writing. And I was like, all right, I'm all in support of that. And like he says, and we'll get more into his background too as an author, but he personally said that he wants more LGBTQ stories out there on bookshelves, and this is one that is like really come to the forefront for this community, and I can see why people are loving it. And it's not heavy-handed in it whatsoever. It just happens to be part of these characters, personality and their lifestyle, and but the overall thing about this book is that it's not really about that. It's about just people and going through their everyday lives and accepting their quote unquote fate, knowing that these guys are going to die at the end of this book. And so we'll get a little bit into it now. The whole premise really is that there's there are two characters, Rufus and Mateo, and they both get a call on the exact same day from Deathcast. This kind of like this system program that basically warns them they're gonna die that day. They only have 24 hours to live. They don't say how, they don't say when and what part of the day, just the fact that they're gonna die. So live your best life. And both of them are like, all right, let's do something about it. And I think that gets the story rolling. So as a plot device, what was your thought of this one big thing that gets the story going? Like, did you like how it really kickstarted everything?
I mean, you're thrown into it for the most part. Like,
Right.
there's, whatever world building happens after that fact. And so it was a little bit jarring, where you kind of open up of like, he got a call from Deathcast. It's like, whoa, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of ultimately left as an unanswered question. I mean, we understand what Deathcast is, but they're never wrong about predicting death. And so it kind of takes on this, I don't know, not supernatural or fantastical element, but very much like, neither here nor there, just worry about the implications. And so once I eased into that, it was easy to accept. But yeah, I mean, just knowing that they're never wrong, yeah, you're kind of on this mission of what does this mean for these characters, right? And so, as a reader, I think we're playing a little bit of catch up, but I think it works to its advantage.
Right, absolutely. And we have these two young guys, Mateo Torrez, who's an 18-year-old Puerto Rican, and then we have Rufus and Emeterio, who is a 17-year-old Cuban American. So we have the the Latin culture and this type of nationality of characters, and I really enjoy that because they're also American as well. So we got the representation there on top of the LGBT Q community as well. So like that's a double hitter in like a very positive way. And I think that's also why people are really gravitating towards this because these are characters you don't always see in books. And so when you have two of those traits, that really makes them more relatable for those who don't have that type of voice out there. But we get Mateo and Rufus. They are like completely different in personalities. Mateo is more he suffers more from anxiety. He's more introverted. He doesn't socialize, not a social butterfly whatsoever. And then Rufus on the other side is very social, has a lot of friends, kind of, not to say lives his life to the fullest, but he definitely goes out and enjoys whatever he's doing. So we have these two kind of polar opposite characters. What were your thoughts of having like these foils to each other? And they do meet up on the Last Friends app. But what were your thoughts of having these two different types of characters living out their last day together?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, sort of, not necessarily like opposites attract, but I think, you know, each one has what the other one needs, and it balances it out, right? Because I think, there's a goodness and inner nature to Mateo, and kind of where his not anxiety stems from. Like, there's also a benefit to it, right? He's like he takes care of his father, his friends and things like that. So he's much more thoughtful in that way, let's say, right? As a generalization. Rufus, he's got that carefree attitude, but it certainly puts him in certain situations that he shouldn't necessarily be in. Like, I mean, we pretty much meet him, and, he's in the middle of this fight that is a big, big catalyst that affects a lot of people's lives, not just his. And so, I think ultimately as the story progresses, obviously they get to this sort of one balance of, recognizing the similarities within each other and how they essentially can be more whole. And I think too, and speaking about just them as people, again, like when you talk about it, I think what's nice is their sexual preference or whatever is just one layer to them as a complete character. When you talk about three-dimensional characters, really it means contradictions, right? I think that's so. It's like, they have all their synchronicities and stuff like that. And for the most part, the backdrop of all this, we might not always see ourselves within them, but overall, as a reader, I was certainly working towards of like, well, what would I do in a situation where, I had maybe at most 24 hours to live, right? And so it's an easy sort of avenue in, and also they're in New York, so like, I think even at least from movies, if nothing else, if you've never been, it's an exciting sort of avenue versus like, I don't know, being somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Somewhere from Illinois that I was from. Yeah, absolutely. I like how you brought that up because, like you said, they are in New York. They are in a busy, bustling city. They have options and opportunities to go enjoy life. And this was one thing that, like, again, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief in this book. But I do like the kind of the updated technology that we have. They have this basically like a Make-A-Wish kind of place that they go to, and they experience like the life adventures, like skydiving, base jumping, like all the thrill kind of adventures that you might not normally get in your regular life. But it's like all condensed in one place. And I like that. They're like, yeah, let's go to this. Let's try to like fit as many of those last wish kind of things, bucket list kind of opportunities we can. So what were your thoughts of this kind of opportunity that was available to them, and how this, I mean, we know in real world we don't have this available to us, but so like the advancement of the technology, especially with the last app, this wish list kind of thing, What were your thoughts of that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems sort of like a natural progression. Like if this was a real thing of, you know, that you would get a call that essentially you're going to die today, then this seems like a natural progression, right? So it felt very much in world in that way. And you know, like it's always interesting when books sort of find you at a time when you kind of like need them in a sense. And
Hmm.
because I don't know, for whatever reason through work, a lot of podcasts that I've been working on have been related to almost using death as this way, you know, and the idea of death as a way to push yourself to live. Because in an odd way, like we all know in our head that we all die, and yet we still otherize it of like, well, everyone else dies. And not that we say it out loud, but it's like we'll live forever, and so we don't take certain risks and whatever. And working backwards from your death and your eulogy and stuff like that, you essentially could and should map out your life and live it to its fullest. And certain, you know, and certainly in this sense, like you know, the closest I think we come to real world stuff is unfortunately of like someone being told, hey, you have a disease and it's terminal, right?
Right.
And you know, in that sense, you don't quite know of like, okay, is it going to be 6 months, could be shorter, could be longer, but you start to reevaluate how you go about certain things. Um, so it's, you know, I think it offers a lot of that philosophical ideology, and it's interesting even the way people interact with them of like, you know, sorry to like lose you, when in reality it's like the people that most of the people that are saying it to them have no connection whatsoever. And yet
Right.
it's a beautiful idea if we like just as a society like actually cared about each other more. um but it also feels very societal in the sense like it's just such a fake thing that we would probably say had we had this technology, right? So we never get to a ultimately what Mateo and Rufus represent is getting beyond the surface level of human connection and really going to that full depth, you know?
Absolutely. The world travel arena, that's what this place is called, that like gives them all the opportunities to travel to different places that they never could in their entire life, all within a day. But I love how you brought that up. You know, some people know when they're going to die. So when it comes to like terminal illnesses or health issues. And that's the difference between Rufus and Mateo, that these are two young guys, teenagers that are seemingly healthy, and they get this unfortunate news that they're going to die. So, you know, it's not really going to be a health. It's not like you're going to contract a disease and die in a day, hopefully. But so it's something situational and something environmental that they kind of know is gonna that'll be what kills them. And I love how there's this lingering suspense throughout the entire story because you're following these guys, and the way it's written is in chronological at timestamps throughout the day, like 8:32 a.m., 8:35 a.m. So we're like literally following them hour by hour. And every time you're reading it, you're like, is this it? Could this be the thing that kills them? You know, when they get on the subway shuts down, you're like, oh no, is another train going to crash into them? Or, you know, so there's always this like lingering fear of, oh, you really don't know when they're going to die or how they're going to die. And I found that exciting because it kept me on my toes and kept me engaged throughout. How about you? Did you feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, certainly because it mattered to the characters, right? So it put me in their shoes. I mean, they were talking about not getting in an elevator, right? And just think about it
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. I mean, how many times do we just not consider that whatsoever? And fine, maybe you might like walk up the stairs if it's a short enough flight, but like if you're going to go to the 10th floor, you know, you're not taking the stairs. And you know, there was that always lingering and perhaps hope on my part as well, just like theirs of like maybe they can overcome this. Maybe they could be the first
Mm-hmm.
people to not die, you know? And yeah, obviously, you know, and thematically, I mean, how certainly Mateo passed away. Talk about you know, what do they call it? Chekhov's gun sort of a moment, right? Like the way they set it up,
Right.
completely um, you know, unsuspecting for me. And then when it happened, you're like, oh, that was inevitable.
Right. And oh yeah, I mean, I guess we're getting there as we'll go back and cover more details, but especially with Mateo's death, because it's one of those things when he gets the notice that he's going to die, and then he's like, okay, these are all the people I have to talk to. These are all the things I have to get done beforehand. He's like, I have to tell my landlord about my stove. It's been on the fritz. I have to do X, Y, and Z. I have to talk to my father. So like, and I think that's the brilliant thing of the writing, that it's just like such a small, quick nugget that's dropped and you don't even think about it, because you literally read it in like 2 seconds and you're on to the next thing. And then that comes back and that ends up being how he dies. The stove explodes, and just because he was wanting to make tea, and you're like, oh crap, that was it. And not to say we should have known, but we did know about it. We did know that this could have been an environmental factor that ends him, because we have heard of stories of, things combusting in houses, catching fires, people dying that way. Like, it's just a small little detail that's brushed over that became the biggest thing when it came to this character's fate. And I thought that was brilliant. I didn't see it coming.
Oddly, very like sadistically poetic, right? Because I mean, they had things falling on them. They could have gotten killed by gunfire, like all these horrific things. And the one thing that like caused this was, yeah, I mean, and which begs the question. I mean, we can work backwards from this too, of like, was it worth it? Was it not? Perhaps that's not the best way to phrase that question, but like in a sense, you start to wonder then, because they kind of wondered a little bit, like, are they the cause of each other's death? And conclusively, it's kind of like, yes, they are. So would they have been better off never meeting? And yet their life in that moment, like they truly lived a full life, even within that one day, whereas most people don't, even in a lifetime. So it's like a catch 22 almost.
Yeah, agreed. And it's one of those things, but it's not to say that each other were the cause of each other's death. But them being together and spending so much time all day and doing all these going to different places, seeing a lot of different people. But like eventually their adventures brought them back to the area and the places of which they died. And that's where you have to question, like, if I wasn't with them, would we have ended up here, which would have caused XYZ? And those are the life's mystery questions, And I think that's what I loved about this book, is that it really does make you think. Like, if God forbid you did get that message, like, you are going to die today, what are you going to do? And that's what the author wanted to write in a story. Like, how would people affect that? Would people just completely shut down, or would people go out and live their best life? Because you have Rufus, who's pretty personable. He has a lot of friends. He actually has experienced death a lot. He's been exposed to it. His whole family's gone. He's living in a foster community, and he has foster friends like that. But he's been exposed to death, so he's kind of, not to say desensitized to it, but he kind of knows how to approach it better than what Mateo does. And I think that's why Rufus is more, not to say nonchalant about it, but he seems like more accepting of his fate, because he sees death more than Mateo. And I like that, because you had one person who's more calmer about the situation, and another person who's kind of like, not to say freaking out, but like really getting that nervous anxiety, panics of like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm losing time. And so they balance each other out in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like for me, Rufus wasn't like he seemed calm, but I think it was more of an apathy to begin with. And like I said, I think they brought each other to this like goodness, right? Where like, Rufus's apathy turned into more of a humanity, and rather than be fully scared of everything, it's like at a certain point you have to live. So that was kind of Mateo's journey, and the idea of, could they have lived sort of a thing. I think, it's as you mentioned, it's a question that can plague us. but interestingly enough, like at least how I grapple it within my own life, like there's things I can control. As Byron Katie would say, like there's your business, other people's business, and then they call it God, call it universe, that business, right? And so, the whole idea of coulda, shoulda, woulda, it's like that's not my business, like, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think where they got to was, I don't know, this realm of just acceptance and living in a more pure and loving life, and accepting things as they are and making the best of it. Um, and so it was beautiful in that sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I loved the slow progression of Mateo's character. I think he had the most character growth in the 24 hours because he starts off, he's introverted. His Instagram are only pictures of black and white. He doesn't go out and socialize. He really doesn't have a lot of friends. He has he has one more meaningful friend, Lydia, who gets all upset at him, being like, "I'm your best friend. You should have told me that you're gonna die. I want to see you." So again, I completely understand because I personally am more introverted. So I understand those. Yeah, he has less amount of people, but they're better in quality. Lydia being his best friend, and it was her idea to go to the world travel arena, anyways. So the it's not about the quantity; it's about the quality of relationships. And he eventually gets to, have his last words with Lydia, and then have his last words with his father, who's been in a coma. So, well, what did you think of this moment where he finally gets to say what he been meaning to say? Because usually you kind of see it on the opposite end, where you're in your deathbed and then you say all your regrets in life and all your big secrets and stuff. But he's not. But he knows he's gonna die, so he's saying all of his personal things, the last things to get off of his chest. So what do you think of that kind of role reversal he finally had with his father?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one, right? I mean, because, you know, I think ultimately, you get the sense that his dad's going to love him no matter what. And had he, been conscious enough to hear him, it would have been like, oh, no big deal. Like, I love you, son, type of thing. Um, but yeah, I think there's a benefit to just getting off, your chest, no different than for like Rufus, just being able to be with his friends one last time because, his funeral, as they called it, was disrupted. Um, I think that was ultimately like the closure that they needed that obviously a lot of us in life don't necessarily get unless we're like really conscious to always tell people we love them, when we call that, like all that stuff, right? That you think that intrinsically you should do, but most
Mm-hmm.
of us never like think about twice. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think and like it's interesting the duality of Rufus and Mateo in terms of death because Rufus witnessed his family dying. Mateo lost his mom, but he wasn't really he wasn't aware of it, right? Because it happened at birth. And as far as like Lydia lost her husband, and yes, Death Cast like notified him, and he tried to get to her. Um, but it's not, But as far as like seeing it, it wasn't like a direct involvement, right? So there's a little bit of
Yeah.
disconnect of like what that fully means of losing somebody.
And it was kind of like Lydia's redemption too, because she couldn't tell the person that she loves and didn't have that proper moment to tell the person that she loves goodbye in that way. This is kind of like her second chance, being able to get to Mateo and be like, "I'm going to help you live your best life," or at least properly say goodbye because you do mean a lot to me in that way. So it does affect a lot of people. These two young guys, they do have a lot of people in their life that actually care about them, which is nice, because they I don't feel like they're truly going through this alone when you have other people, being there to support you and reinforcing and reassuring that they are loved. So they're not leaving this world uh, um, with like no memories of them, what have you. So like I think it kind of leaves them on a better note, knowing that they're leaving being loved.
Yeah,
Um,
and obviously there's no one correct way, just like in life, right? I mean, each of the supporting characters has their version of how they feel like is the best way, right? So you certainly have Rufus, some of Rufus's friends, just continuing to make jokes and laugh about stuff because that's just how it is, right? And
right,
for
the
them to do,
Plutos. We
yeah,
have Amy, Malcolm, and Tego. They're his foster siblings who kind of become their basically the close his family basically, and you can tell that they really do care about Rufus.
absolutely. And I think Tego in particular, he's the one who's just never going to be taking himself or anything serious. And so he's the one that's like the jokester in all this. Amy is certainly the one that emotionally takes it the hardest, and she's conflicted. Which at a certain point, I definitely want to talk about you know, the whole sort of her boyfriend and the fight aspect of all of it because I thought that was interesting. But
Yeah, do let's do it. You brought it up. Because you mentioned before that Rufus, well, like that is the benefit of getting the notice of, hey, you're gonna die. So very rarely, I mean, not ever, that people who die can attend their funeral. So Rufus and the Plutos put on this funeral, this service for him. It gets interrupted by Peck because Peck is all jealous. He just started dating Amy. And he doesn't like Rufus, and Rufus beat him up, Rufus beat him up before the service, but now now Peck is crashing the service and like really ruining it. So your thoughts?
yeah, I mean, all that happens very early on, and you're trusting in that moment enough to like see that okay, there must be something to Amy and Peck. And ultimately, it's interesting. Like as time went on, I didn't fully, I mean, I understood it from a, heady sort of perspective of why Amy and Peck were together, but I never also got the sense like that this was like a guy that I wanted Amy to be with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was, unfortunate in all those respects. And it doesn't, and I appreciate that Rufus really grappled with the idea that like he shouldn't have done that and that was his mistake and the weight of all of it. But yeah, I mean, I overall like there was various storyline like the Peck storyline. I didn't necessarily mind. Lydia's storyline I thought worked. I thought towards like the middle to late part, we started getting a lot of like various other characters, and not that I could keep them straight in my mind overall, but it became a little bit like, okay, what is this adding to the story versus not, you know?
Yeah. We tend to have a habit of reading books that has like 30 plus characters. That's like a running theme with us. Um, but unfortunately, this book, like the two main characters, you can kind of easily keep track of Rufus and Mateo. But then you said that the side characters. So these guys aren't the only ones who get this notice of their death. They're like, this is a service that calls out thousands of people each day. And what I actually enjoyed about this book, which I feel like it added some balance, you get all these B characters as well who also get the same messages, and you get females, you get older gentlemen, you get younger people. So you get the perspective of other people and how some think it's a joke, some completely just brush it off, be like, this is probably spam, whatever, and they go about living their lives, and or they're so defiant of it that they're in such denial. And so what were your thoughts of like the different perspectives that aren't these two main guys of how they lived their life on their last day?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Again, it was part of just like trying to juggle it all and seeing where it fit into the overall story because ultimately it does tie a bow around all of it overall, right? how neat of a bow it is, can be up for debate. But and it also, most of the chapters, like when it introduced a new character like Lydia, it would say something to the effect of, Lydia did not get a call from Deathcast this morning because she is not dying, right? So you kind of
Yes.
define who was going to live, who was going to die. And, for the most part, if anything, like we definitely, like it was interesting that Mateo's and Rufus's sort of favorite actor, the actor that played it very, like it was that character
Maldonado.
was
Howie Maldonado.
yes. So he got the call, and then that became a big thing. And then there's like a whole journalistic side to it where, this girl's at like, the low end of the totem pole, so to speak. But she really knows this person's life. And so she wants to be part of telling his story. And she gets that opportunity by essentially weaseling her way into it, which is good for her.
Right.
But yeah, like we start to track, but then also we like track even, so we introduce like Peck, and we track him for a little bit. And then even like Peck's like, people that he knows that like just basically crush bodies, which he's recruiting to like beat the crap out of Rufus. So it's like all of a sudden you get a lot of splintering offs at a certain point, which, comes back by the end. But also like, I'm curious just even in general, how you think Rufus dies. Like, because it's hinted at very strongly, but it's never like outright stated. Because obviously he's sort of narrating his own story, and he can't narrate his own death
because it ends.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I read it as, I actually had to read the end twice because it ended so fast. I was like, wait, okay. I had one of those moments. He was watching a video of Mateo, and it's implied that he stepped off the curb while busy watching the video and wasn't paying attention to his surroundings, and he got hit by, I'm assuming, a car or some vehicle, some fast vehicle. So he got hit while walking off of a curb.
But and wasn't it the girl that's the journalist? She was in the car.
See, that's a good question. I might have missed that.
Because she survived, I forget, because she survived the car crash with the actor. Yeah, there's a lot of like.
Right. And well, that also begs the question, because we are like late at night. We're almost like to midnight. These guys almost literally lasted to midnight. And yeah, I crossed the stream without an arm to hold me back. The last entry is at 10:36 p.m. So I mean, it's later at night. But no, that's a good question. I never really thought about that. Could it have been?
I think because I think,
all right,
as I recall, and I could be conflating two different elements, so apologies for that. But
right.
The girl thought it was a joke that she got the call because she knows someone that works at Deathcast. She had a relationship with somebody that worked at Deathcast, and so she thought it was a trick being played on her.
You're right.
But then it was like, wait, once she called him, it got a little bit very grave of like, I didn't do that. And it was like, oh crap, you're going to die today.
Right. And then she has that whole regret, like, oh crap, like most of the day is almost gone. I completely wasted it. So like she has that, kind of grenade of a response, that delayed response, that and you see how these other side characters, you got the wrestler Finn Pierce, you got the wrestler who's just bitter on life. He's like, yeah, I should have died a long time ago, finally it's here. And then we had Dama Young, who's the founder of the last app. So like, and I loved how, because we're following Mateo and Rufus throughout the city, and they're on the subway, they're in the parks, they're here. They run into a lot of people. I mean, it is, the city. And I think that's the brilliance of it, because when you get these side characters, their stories, they're like, yeah, and I saw these two kids running, they almost crashed into me, so like eventually everyone crossed paths. These guys crossed everybody's paths, and it kind of just goes to show like it is a small world. And I think that's really good, because that's another way of how Adam Silvera, the author, could write other characters. We know that there is a prequel book to this that's based on two other different characters.
Was it two girls?
Completely.
Because
What?
there was again, hopefully I'm getting all the facts right, but like through the Last Friend app, there was someone that Mateo kind of connected but blew off, and it was a girl, and then she became friends with somebody else, and they were on the subway, and it kind of was a nice mirror to Mateo and Rufus, because they ultimately needed to find each other. So I thought that was like a little beautiful moment. And all.
Yeah. So yeah, eventually, like everyone kind of connects to each other in some facet. They branch out in different ways, and I think it's actually really good writing, because it just shows that there are so many characters in this book that you could go and write about their lives for that day. The different parallel stories that could be going on at the same time, which is, that's fun. I totally would read that as well. The prequel is called The First to Die at the End. Also about two different guys. I haven't read it, but after this book, I'd be curious to read it. Because I think I like the overall pacing of it, because we had the timestamp entries, chronological, kind of like journalistic in it, or when you write journals, your entries in that way. And each chapter wasn't super long; they're like maybe 5 pages at most, and then we jumped back and forth. And I personally like the writing style. How about you? Did you like how we kept the story going?
Yeah, overall, like I said, I mean, I thought it worked well. It progressed well. It was just there was just like a part, maybe it was like 4 or 5 p.m., let's say, where it was like, okay, where's the progressive complication for Mateos and Rufus? It's like we're having fun. I think it was like a series of like 3 chapters of we're just having fun. And it was like, that's great.
Right.
Where's the inner turmoil? But apart from that, yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, it weaves this tapestry of elegance, and at no point did I not think it was headed somewhere. And yeah, how it all kind of plays out was really fun and gives you a lot to think about. And I think, certainly it rounds out the world for you to really consider of all these different things. I mean, just the fact, and again, this is like the heinous side of, you can imagine this being real. You have this Last Friend app, and you have a Last Friend serial killer, right?
Right.
Like preying on these people. And yeah, so it's just kind of like, you see both the good side of life, and you also see the horrific side of, all of this. And it's like, yeah, every advancement throughout humanity can be very, very good. Can also
Right.
be very, very crappy.
Yeah, and you just like, well, like you said, humanity is just like, you get this serial killer who's just taking advantage of people, like vulnerable people. Especially when it's their last day. They're emotional. They're not thinking straight. They're not doing what they normally would be doing that day. So to blindside them and to kill them, which is even worse. But it's not far from what humans do. It's really crappy in human nature that there are people like that, and it's sick. It's sick and twisted. I'm glad that we didn't really like fully get into that, but it is disheartening to know that there are people like that out in the world. And I think that's why you have to be, that is the cautionary tale of online profiles and dating. And you just have to be careful and vet, and be careful who you're talking to and who you're putting your trust in, because catfishing is real. I want to get a little bit into, so we see the progression of Mateo and pulling back those layers, and him like slowly actually like now starting to enjoy life. His fear of the world is kind of depleting, and he's, unfortunately, it is his last day, but I feel like it got a little too late that you're like, oh, it literally took you the kick in the ass to be like, all right, now you're dying. Now you have to enjoy life. And but I loved how he finally like let his guard down and he was starting to truly enjoy what he was doing. And the whole message of not doing it alone, the human connection, doing it with Rufus. What were your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like anything in life, right? I think we can very easily feel regret over X, Y, and Z. But I think we just need to learn to have grace with ourselves. And it's like, okay, it doesn't have to be a death thing, but like, let's say you have some sort of, emotional transformation, whatever it may be, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Now just live out your life in the best way that you can moving forward. And what once was, what are you going to do about it? You know what I mean? Take the lessons, but don't berate yourself over all of it. And I think that was the transformation for Mateo. He learned to really live. Um, and yeah, I'm very happy for him. I mean, obviously, I don't wish that he died, but
Mm-hmm.
that is the. I mean, it's kind of like the tragedy in real life too. I mean, accidents sort of happen, or through unknown reasons, someone eats well, takes care of their body, and yet, the bell tolls for them way too soon. It's like, yeah, that's just unfortunately the reality of the world.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to get anything out of this book, I think the overall message is live your life to the fullest and do it with the people who you love. Don't do it alone because that's not a full life. Um, and I think, especially us three, or, like us two going through the last 3 years of the pandemic, we quickly realize how important it is to be social, how important it is we rely on family and friends to keep living. Because when we're forced to put distance between us, like we are human creatures, we are social creatures and social beings that we need that human interaction. Um, and I definitely got it in this book. I definitely understood like the need to reach out to those who you care about because you never know. You never know. Like, I mean, Mateo could have not been brave enough to get out of his bedroom and he could have died all alone. And because he doesn't have a lot of people in his life, who would have known he would have died? Who?
Yeah.
So
And I think, this isn't necessarily related to the book, although you could like kind of lump it in. I don't know.
mhm.
It's tangential, but in the same way, I think, there are times where people think that they want to be a burden to somebody else, or perhaps they feel like, nobody else cares. And for whatever it's worth, I think I mean, it all started with the simple act of, Mateo in this instance, call it brave enough to reach out on the Last Friends app and putting himself out there, right? And yes, he did the vetting as you said, but then, he really did take that leap of faith on a Rufus. So I think, I'm not saying it has to be with a stranger, but I think too many times we feel like we don't want to be a burden on the people in our lives, like Mateo with Lydia, and it's like, no, give them that opportunity because it's much for them as it is for you. And if they're truly your friend, they'll want to help and they'll see it as a way to give back, so to speak, or however they may term it.
Right. And I completely understand it's like that I am an introvert. So it's like I personally like when something happens to me, I don't like to go out and tell people exactly what it is. I like to deal with it myself because it's my problem. No one else should have to deal with it. Again, that burden aspect that you said. But I think it's when you have to like realize like, oh no, I should reach out because that's healthy. And the people who do truly care about you and love you will help in that way. They won't see it as a burden. They'll help you go through whatever it is you're going through. Um, Again, that human interaction that we all need. It's very important. It's healthy. It's healthy. Um,
It's needed. I mean, I
yeah,
mean, that's the
absolutely.
thing. Like, to get really like one of the woes of the world is like it just tries to create these automatons out of us where we're so separate, blah blah blah. And just it's like, and if anything, yeah, the daily struggle, kind of keeps us separated. Like we're trying to all just float and do our best. And so, yeah, it becomes just very problematic where, none of us do have time for each other. We would like to, but we're all just like trying to just get through the damn day most of the time.
Yep.
Uh, so it is rough in that way. And I think, we all just have to recognize that, you know what, we can get off the damn Ferris wheel and let's just all help each other out.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything else about this book? Any other things that we may have accidentally missed or skipped over that you might have want to bring up?
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that we could have gone down, but I think overall we did a good enough
Right.
job. Certainly, I invite anybody who's watching or listening to comment or hit us up on social media, and we can go into more depth. But I think, you know, I certainly would be talking just for the sake of talking.
Right. Yeah. So again, like I said at the top, written by Adam Silvera. I had never heard of him. But a little bit about him. He was born and raised in New York. He now lives in LA, Los Angeles. And he worked in the publishing industry as a children's bookseller. Um, and so he was a book reviewer for children and young adult novels. But he, being Puerto Rican, who more looks like he says himself the character is a white passing Puerto Rican like I am. My white passing was a privilege that I came to understand more after the 2016 election and was previously ignorant to the fact that he had a lot of benefits as the white man does. But that kind of like was the catalyst for these characters is that that's not how he would describe himself, and that's not personally like their ethnicities were in no way affected like their everyday life or like what they did and their decisions, and I saw that. And he wanted to write more characters like himself into these stories, and so he has more books like that. And I personally enjoy that because representation. It's like I rarely see, and maybe this could be me, but I haven't seen a lot of Filipino writers out there, or I haven't read a lot of Filipino American stories. I'd love to see more of that. So to be that author who's aware of that and actually doing it and putting it out there for other people to make it relatable, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think too, like for me, I think the way I consider it, like, all that stuff is out there. Because I was noticing like there being a huge void and sort of just stories that I want to read, and diversify, and they're out there. The problem is a lot of them don't get amplified, right? And so that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I appreciate about obviously what Adam's doing, but also what we're trying to do in our own way is to, highlight amazing authors that don't appear on the top. I mean, this one, is on the New York Times bestseller, type of thing, but just in general, bringing more awareness to, you know, just the quality of writing that exists out there that often is overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that there was HBO with J.J. Adams' company, Bad Robot. I think they were working on adapting this book into a series. I don't know where that has gone, how far along it is in the development process, but if it does come to fruition, I would totally watch it. With the chronological writing that is this book, so you can easily take it like hour by hour and follow these characters along. I am along for the ride for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, HBO and Warner Brothers Discovery is kind of up in the air right now. So
Yeah,
I think if anything does come, it'll be a couple of years here and there, but it would be cool to see for sure. But yeah, very, very
absolutely.
overall exciting.
Absolutely. All right. So, Phil, our next book is
The World We Make by N.K. Jemisin. So, very well regarded author, an author that a few of my friends have read, not the book we're about to read, but she has different trilogies and stuff like that. Neil Gaiman speaks highly of her. And so I want to kind of dive into the fantasy realm. And so it's The World We Make. That's the book that we're gonna tackle next month. And then
Awesome.
for April lined up as well.
Yeah, I was debating. I was like, what? Like, I've had this book for a while now. The Water for Elephants. There has been the movie adaptation, but I haven't seen the movie either. So I was like, all right, I'm very well aware of the story. I know it's out there. And I think it'd be a good opportunity for us to read. And it takes place back in the early 1900s, I believe, during the Depression era. So like late 20s, 30s era. And I think it's good because I feel like we've been reading a lot of fantasy, which is great. But to get back into like more time periods, I think would be a nice switch for us.
Yeah. And also to just the layout kind of there's a lot of authors who, join book clubs. So we're gonna try to also pick some books based around that. And if you have any suggestions of authors that known for doing that and who have written good books that might be of interest for us to discuss, let us know. I think Marissa and I love talking about books, but it's also we want to get the answers from the source itself sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be fun.
All right, Phil, where can everyone follow you?
At Phil Svitek, and as mentioned, whatever we didn't hit, because I'm sure there's, like I said, plenty of avenues to discuss. Just hit us up on social media or comment down below.
There you go, and you can follow me at Serafini TV. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, tuning in, and reading with us. Hopefully you join us for our next few books down the line, and we will talk to you about our next book.